Right. So just like Ibrahim said, I'm a data science instructor. I I love the idea of community, and I am also a Google developer expert for data and cloud, and also an aspiring data engineer and cloud engineer. Right. So first off, I would start off by sharing my screen, and my hope is that everyone can see my screen. And today's session is tagged dreams, data, and discipline, and a path to building people and systems. So I like to start off by saying that this is not a motivational talk. It is not. It's basically a moment of reflection, and a reflection on how we should make real progress in life, right? This this idea or this presentation is born out of a lived experience building communities, programs, and systems. And I think it works. I know it works. There are a ton of people in the world who have made headway by using a community as a service. But today I'm going to frame this community as a service as a part to building people and systems. And yeah, and so that's how I'm going to get it started. Now, a very interesting thing to note is to ask the question why this is so critical. It is critical for many reasons, right? As human beings, we have dreams, and at a point, we always encourage that we have a right to dream. However, we dream a lot, but we rarely build a system that helps our dreams. And that's why most initiatives fail, because the idea wasn't bad, but it wasn't sustainable, right? And so today, the three pillars, just like I mentioned here, dreams, data, and discipline. And together, right, I've used this as a framework to help people figure themselves out, to build communities, to build myself as I progress in this journey. Again, another context is I am I wanted to become a data scientist in 2016, and for anybody getting into the data science space, and at the time, data science was like what artificial intelligence is now. Really interesting thing is a major part of data, artificial intelligence is data science, but yeah, that's a different conversation. And for like 4 years, I dreamed a lot. I wanted, in my dreams, I see myself with a very expensive laptop. I see myself driving a really great car and being critical to the ecosystem. And for 4 years, I had that dream. And, you know, and for the first 2 years, from 2016 to 2018, I did things on my own. And in 2018, I joined the community. I joined CoLab Innovation Hub as a subscriber. Now, when I joined as a subscriber, we had this, it's called, we do it every month. It's a town hall meeting, CoLab's town hall meeting. And there, the CoLab founder, Sanusi Ismaila, will talk about a lot of things from, your dreams, introspection, systems, being able to visualize what your dream is, and trying as much and using community to drive your dreams, which is building an ecosystem or building a social structure while you're pushing what you want to achieve. And I think it was in 2021. So what Sanusi does is Sanusi just goes out, gets really important folks, bring them to the hub, and then get us to ask them questions, and in turn get that really important person to ask us questions. And it was at that point, I think it was Aditya filmed. At the time, he was in Kaduna trying to, wanted to shoot then The Black Book. It was a movie that really became pretty successful. I had to watch that movie because at the time I was inspired by Aditya because of that. Right. So that was basically why the conversation became so important, because he asked me a question: why are you doing what you're doing? And I couldn't answer. And that was the beginning of it. So why it's pretty important, why this conversation is really significant at this point, is because we all have dreams, but we don't have infrastructures for those dreams to become a reality. And so that's a part of why we're having this conversation today. Right. So dreams are not fantasies, right? They are directional signals, right? The dreams answer the questions why we are willing to show up when things get difficult, and things are almost always difficult, right? However, your dreams must evolve, right? They must evolve and become more specific. And for your dreams to become specific, you've got to build systems that will make you gain clarity and direction, right? Clarity and direction. And mind you, there's nothing about size, there's nothing about perfection, it's just clarity and direction, right? So again, know it, you have that right to dream. However, and dreams are just directions. You have a direction for what you want to achieve as a person. It becomes important to dream, and the dream creates that connection. Right. Now, once you dream, you have a vision in your head, right? And one of the greatest issues people typically have when they have these dreams, or when they have dreams, is that they often get stuck waiting for clarity before taking action, right? And that leads me to the next slide, rather this slide where we talk about dreams in the real world. Now, your dream has to go from a point of being in your head to clarity, and then to taking action, right? The clarity in your dream is sort of like the combustion engine, right? It's like the fuel for the combustion engine, and that's what makes the movement, right? So if you have a dream but there's no clarity about the dream, then the movement is sort of stuck. And I talk to a lot of I engage with learners every day, and learners have really grand dreams. Learners in the tech space, wanting to be data scientists, software engineers, blockchain developers, product designers, data engineers, and everybody has a dream, but one thing that the dream lacks is clarity. And it's normal, right? So that's why, and a lot of the time I like to give that small space where I tell folks to, why don't you do a little research and then try to make sense, try to be clear about what you want to do. So, and most times I tell folks, look out for a role where a real human being has that going on, and say, okay, this is what I want to do. So again, it's not perfect. I'll give you an example. In 2021, February, Aditya Film asked me, it was February, I think February 19th or so, 21st. He asked me, why do I want to be a data scientist? Right. And at that point, I wasn't sure why I wanted to be one. And so that meant I didn't have a clarity for what I wanted to do. So that means every day I just sat down and took online courses and read books and read stuff pertaining to data science. And at a point, I knew I needed to start, right? And for me to start, I needed to initiate motion. So right after 19th of February 2021, the pandemic was, I think it was 2020, right from 2020, but pandemic started to brew from December, then January, February, then in March, we had a lockdown in Kaduna, right? The lockdown date was either a day or two to my birthday or exactly on my birthday. And so for me, I had to sit down and ask myself, what is this one thing that I needed to do to change, to make my dreams come true as a data scientist, and why? And I figured that I figured at the time that I loved to teach stuff. And if I loved to teach stuff, I figured I might as well teach data science and become great at data science. I also thought that it will make there has to be, for me to be a data scientist, I should be able to use data to change the way the world sees things. And in order to change the way the world sees things, I need to solve problems. Right. So that was how I looked at it. And it wasn't, I mean, at the point, it wasn't typically, it wasn't what you would call perfect at the time. It wasn't, right? But I resigned to myself that I will stick to that imperfect dream and then learn along the way. So that's what it actually means for dreams in the real world, right? You have to reinforce the dream, initiate emotion, right? But you won't have a full execution plan, right? So that's typically where it is at that point. And so for me, my first execution plan that wasn't foolproof was, one, I had to learn to be a data scientist, but at the same time, I also had to teach others to become good at being data scientists. And it's such a tricky thing to do, because at that point you've got to ask yourself, look, I'm not really good at this. So at the same time, I have to give a shout out to my community at CoLab, and also a shout out to Sanusi Ismail, the CoLab founder. Since the dreams were imperfect, we had to, build ourselves while we built the dream we wanted, and also help others find themselves. Right. So that was my dream. That was the dream in the real world. Now you can, extrapolate from this. You want to be great at what you do. You've got to think of how you can, push that dream and ensure that it works. And for me, the community side of thing, which is taking your dream and finding people who have similar dreams and then trying to get them to realize this can work, is something huge, right? And so that was it. That's one way I figured mine out, and then yeah, and that was it. Now, a really interesting aspect of your dream is the data that comes with it, right? As a data scientist, I'll tell you that data is huge in everything you do. With data, there's feedback. With data, you take away your ego from what you do. With data, you have to always ask yourself, are these anecdotal, evidences, or are they factual, right? So this is really an interesting way to look at it, because the data from this situation will serve as your reality. And at every point, you must keep your ego aside and take the feedback. This is where you have the beginner's mindset. I think there's a Japanese philosophy that's called Shoshin, always having a beginner's mindset. So that means you have to look at every feedback and make sense of it. And I know it's not perfect at that time, because there's a lot of ego thing going on, right? A lot of the time you would meet decisions that or feedback that doesn't really, doesn't make you happy, right? So the reality is that you have to go from, you have to go from your ego to using data, right? And that data would replace your assumptions and serve as your decision-making platform. And this is where it becomes really, important, because that now becomes your evidence, right? I'll give you a really interesting example. So at CoLab, I started our data science community. Now, the data science community at CoLab had started, let's say, unofficially. The CoLab CTO, Robert John, will just get people who are interested in learning data science, and we just sit down in a place and just learn stuff together. Right. And then he did it for a bit. Then at the time he moved because he had a role. He joined a startup, and at the time, a few of us, also some of us, left right after the pandemic. A lot of opportunities just jumped up right after the pandemic, or during that period. And so I was there, and I figured, okay, why don't I start our community, the data science community. Now, what we did was we now had cohorts, data science cohorts, where people came in and learned stuff. Now, in the first data science cohort, I was teaching folks data science. So I started by telling people you can take data, and when you take data, you can do a lot of things with it. So I'll just take out a tool, ingest the data, and then, get people to learn. Now, while that was going on, someone just, I can't remember the student, but the student just said, sorry, sir, but you keep writing Python codes, but we don't know Python. And you see, this is where the data comes in, right? Because as you help folks will always say, oh, sorry, but I don't know Python. And what do you think we should do about that? And immediately that was an insight. And that was already like a feedback. And so what do I do? What did I do? I just reviewed the curriculum. I said, you know what, starting in our next cohort would have introduction to Python. And so that's how we now had introduction to Python, and then straight up to data analysis. And then next, when folks were learning introduction to Python, then next to data analysis, somebody else said, you keep making references to statistical concepts. Well, I don't really understand these statistical concepts. And now there's another insight. So basically, we just kept going from one thing to another, you see. So again, imagine I had to say, now I know what I'm doing, then that means my ego comes through. And what I did when I got home was I asked myself, do you know Python? Not really. And then I guess I have to learn Python. So what I had to do was I'll learn Python, come to the to our community learning forum and teach people. And I'll make mistakes. And people would either correct me, or they would either point that there was something not clear. And those things were just, how that happened. So typically the data served as my intuition and insight. And that led to me, practicing a lot of these things, right? So as this went on, people came in and learned stuff. And so now I'll take a pause here just to let you know a few things. As you go to build yourself, you have dreams. And that's huge. And remember, it's really, really important. You have dreams. But then remember, your dreams wouldn't work. It's for you to create some sort of some motion in your dream, initiate motion. You need the data. That data is in your environment. And that environment is when you make that move and say, okay, I need to do this. You research, you ask yourself questions, you try some things, and if it fails, it's sort of like the feedback coming back. Now, once you get that feedback, once you get the feedback, it's great because that's the insight you have. But the insights and the intuition you gain from it makes no sense if that data isn't in practice. right? So you have to keep doing it, and you have to practice these things, because at a point, the data you have will contradict the assumptions. The data you get will contradict the assumptions you have. And once the data you have contradicts the assumptions you have, you're left with no option but to improve. Right. I'll tell you something. This is a very this is a personal one. I took a trip with the CoLab founder, and the CoLab founder told me, and then what we used to do is, at that time, the CoLab founder, Sanusi Ismaila, was like our psychologist. At any point where we failed in stuff, we all just went back to him and just threw it on him. And he said, look, you need to create a system for judging how well you do stuff, right? And the metrics that you get from this position is super, super important. And this part is, I had to figure out, okay, what did I have to do? I had to find a consistency metric, right? And that was super important. So what I did was I decided to learn a foreign language, that's German. And so every day I started learning the foreign language. I told myself, okay, every day I must learn a bit of this, which is to build my consistency. And as difficult as it is, that's going to be how difficult for me to build this dream I have. But if I get to stop, then that means I don't get to learn anything. So I created a metrics of consistency on one hand, and every day I knew I had to just keep, going at it for me to succeed in that space. So again, you get the data, right? It challenges your assumptions, and you improve. Also, with the data in practice, you build yourself metrics, and these metrics, you use them to learn. Again, remember, this is a very tricky position at this point. You get the data, you ensure that this data is not just vanity metrics. It's not something like you tell yourself, okay, it makes you feel good. And when you get the data, you use it to learn. And remember, there's a difference between learning and impressing. So a lot of people get data, and the first idea is to impress. So these are two different things. Learning and impressing are two different things. So again, this part is super, super important. Right. Now, today's session is focused on 3 pillars. It's dreams, data, and discipline. Now, to succeed in anything you're doing, you've got to have a system of discipline, right? And discipline is, if you look at the family tree of discipline, right, one of the lifeblood of that family tree is consistency, right? Discipline is that invisible force that stays for a long time if you let it. It is that thing that says, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, even if I hate it. Right? One of the greatest things, one of the greatest features for me in discipline is consistency. I am super, super, like, I'm super huge about consistency, because that's what keeps you going regardless of how difficult it is. Again, I think one of the greatest enemies of consistency is intensity. A lot of the time we figure what our dreams are and what are the data for how we should initiate direction, but then we become intense. And the instance we become intense, we fall off at the time, because you, you have to show up even when the motivation is gone. Because again, the motivation would almost always die away. But the discipline is what keeps you there. It's the consistency. Right. One thing you should know is that discipline protects the progress, regardless of how slow it is or how difficult it is. And that's why it's one of the strongest pillars right after understanding your dreams, understanding your direction, and then gathering the data, and then figuring out the right metrics. You now need the long term. And so as much as you've gotten these three pillars together, you need to build a system that works. And for me, that's the part that builds it. Once the system is, because the thing that makes the dreams die is there's no system to fall back on. There's this stuff that I don't know who said it. Somehow I think it's James Clear that says when you fail back to the systems that you have. I think actually it should be James Clear, I think. Right. And so once you have this and you lack a system, because they are almost always going to be failures at every point, right? You would realize that the discipline itself helps you build the system. It does, right? One of the, again, in this part, one dangerous thing to do is to rely on your willpower, because if you rely on your willpower, it's going to lead to a lot of burnout. And so it is important to, to be intentional about designing systems and routines that make your progress inevitable. For me, there were things I did. One of them was, on enjoying streaks. I love streaks. That means streaks. I've been learning German now for 5 years. And so what I did was every day I jump on Duolingo, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. And now it's just about like 1,940 days, right? Now, how did I achieve this? What I did was I had this, because I read a lot of books around deliberate practice, deep work, shout out to Cal Newport. I had to build a system where I had to show up every day and just do some type of work. So I create notes that exist on their own. I put dates to them. I put the number of hours I'll use to do stuff. And then I just try to give every hour a job or every minute a job, right? So I designed a system that was about routines, right? And I tried as much as possible to learn stuff and just reduce the cognitive load, right? But at the same time, the system supported sustainability. And this is important because at every point, your system just has to, support what you do. The system has to outperform you in a way. It has to be there. So, and again, building a system means creating something that stands out on its own. So if you have like an Excel or a Google sheet where you drop everything you're going to do every day before your day starts, that Excel sheet is going to be there. The instance you have, or let's say that Google sheet. So if you have the Google sheet, that means the Google sheet is there. And so even if you don't have internet, the Google sheet remains there. And because the Google Sheets they are built sort of like they are in lines or like steps, it takes the place of the reminder in your head. Because if you rely on your head to remind you of what you've got to do, your brain has other things to do, like remind you when to sleep, when to eat, when to do some really, really primitive things. But the idea of reminding you to read or to reminding you that you have a course you haven't completed, most times what the brain does is to startle you, to just say, oh, look, you have not read this in 2 days, the kind of thing, and you just start getting worked up. So building a system, that, outlasts you is very, very important. Right. Now, we've talked about data, data, discipline. Now, all this, and we also talked about systems. Now, the most important aspect of it is, I think is the most important, is when you now start building people. Now, people are a reflection of, they are like they are the moving feedback of what we want to be, right? They are the feedback that exists. And this feedback tells us how well we're doing stuff. Every time you want to be great at what you do, you almost always think of building projects. But have you ever thought of the idea of building people, right? Not just projects. So what this does for you is you think of the things you want to be, and you look out for folks who are looking to do the same thing or something similar. And you decide, you try to build those people either by mentoring them, by teaching them, or by leading them. Now, there's this saying that there's a lot of saying around it, that which you want to master, you teach. What you teach, you learn twice, right? The impact on the people is also a direct impact on you. When you emphasize building people, you emphasize building yourself. When you emphasize building people, the discipline to improve yourself becomes critical. Because the reality is, if you have to build people, you have to build yourself. You have to come correct first, right? And when you build people and you're inversely building yourself, then there's this compounding effect that comes into play, right? And that's super important. The compounding effect is, I heard it first when I read the book Principles by Ray Dalio. Now, whenever I talk about the compounding effect, a lot of people start to think about the compound interest. It's literally a very simple, and it's not really like the compound interest, so to speak. Now, it's like the consistency that comes with things. If you think about, if you take, $1,000, and every day you take out and you keep $1,000 on the table, you know that if you keep up with that, the next day you're going to have 2,000. The third day, and you see, it just keeps going. And by the end of the year, you have 365,000. Now, teaching people has that impact. It has a compounding effect. If you invest in developing people, it has a compounding effect on you. And this idea isn't talked about much. When we think about building ourselves, our first instinct, building our ambition, our first instinct is always us. And that instinct means we just get back into that dark corner, sit down, open our laptops, and start to think about ourselves. But when you move with people, when you build with people, you go farther than doing it yourself. And there's a system. It's gradually a system. At CoLab Innovation Hub, community is a driver. Community is an important feature. Community is a pillar, right? And once the community is there, you're typically growing faster than you think. And because you've got to show up before every other person, so which means you're punctual. You've got to think of really intuitive ways to help people learn. That means you build your creativity. You've got to be as honest as possible to people. And to be honest to people, you've got to be honest to yourself. And that honesty is a very huge value. You've got to be accountable. And if you got to get people to be really accountable, you have to be accountable to yourself. And accountability is such a huge factor when growing into what you want to be as a person. So you see, all these effects, come together to build the system and the dream, the data, the systems, the people, the compounding effects, the values that come from it, right? Create something really critical. And that's it. And that critical aspect of it is when the system works. And you start to see it. Things start to happen. You go from being unaware and unconscious of the things you don't know to being aware of your incompetence, which is actually a very great thing. And you go from your awareness of your incompetence to being unaware of your competence. And that's the part where you are deliberate about what you do, till you become aware of how competent you are. And that's where the expert level is. And that is where ownership comes in. That's where you build initiatives. That's where the real leadership steps in. That's where you build capacity. You build capacity and independence. And remember, the interesting part is the system you have built will almost always outlast you. You've mentored people, you've built people, you've grown them to a point where they become really great at what they do, and they just outlast you and keep growing and even get better than you, which is because it's typically not about you. It's about, ensuring that there's a system that works. And remember, guys, the dreams, the data, the discipline, they form a loop. It's not a straight line, right? Dreams set directions, data checks reality, and discipline sustains the momentum. And you've got to reflect on this like a loop. And the loop means you keep going in circles. And if you're going in a circle, that means you would almost reflect and be practical about what you're doing, right? And if you do that more, then you're getting great at it. So yeah, so that's basically what this whole idea about the dream, the data, the dream, the systems that work, and the path to building human beings and the success that comes with it. Right. So I mean, it's super important because the length for which you're going to build is definitely never going to end, right? The long term is an emphasis that drives through consistent work, enjoying boredom, right? Being bold, being honest, and showing up consistently. The short term is, for lack of a better term, is more or less like a disease. Apologies for that term, but the short term just keeps you within a certain place, but the long term is the cure. The long term is the remedy, the panacea. I don't know if I've used that term before, but it's the panacea. So yeah, thank you for listening. And I would encourage you guys to ask questions at this point. And yeah.